Hey, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for joining us one last time to speak with one of our candidates here that's going to be running for supervisor in West Deer. Tonight, we're going to be talking with Josh Wiegand, who is our District 4 candidate on the Democratic ticket. And he's going to be joining us for about 25 minutes. I'm just going to start off by saying that we're gonna limit this conversation to 25 minutes, at most 30. And Josh and I haven't talked about this interview before we got together here today, and it's gonna be we're gonna be hearing from each other really for the first time on these topics. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Josh Wiegand, a man with decades of service here in West Deer Township. Josh, thank you for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about how you got where you are right now.
Um, well, I've been a member of the volunteer fire department for the past 30 years and serving 17 years as fire chief. I've worked for West Deer EMS for over 20 years. I've also served for the West Deer Township Emergency Management Agency for about 25 years. And, 2 years ago, I was motivated to run for township supervisor. So I did so and I won. And, this time around, I'll be running for re-election in District 4.
So you got motivated to run. What motivated you to do that? I mean, the pay is not very good. So what made you decide to go into this kind of treacherous role?
Yeah, the pay is not very good. So I saw the township. I've lived here all my life, 44 years. Graduated from Deer Lakes in '99 and bought a house here in Grouse Run where I live with my wife and my son. And I was concerned about the amount of development that we're seeing here in West Deer. It seems to be coming from all angles at this point. And having a long history in public safety, one of my biggest concerns was, the public safety agency is getting overwhelmed, police, fire, and EMS. I have a consulting business, Wiegand Consulting, in which I help public safety organizations obtain grant funding. I have hundreds of clients in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. And we've been successful in obtaining, critical grant funding for them. Back in 2016, Senator Randy Volakovich appointed me to what is called the Senate Resolution 6 Commission. And myself, along with other fire chiefs, CMS directors, senators, and representatives, traveled around Pennsylvania, had multiple meetings to deal with the crisis that faces volunteer fire departments and EMS. And everywhere we went in the state, it was, the same story. The biggest need is manpower. That's common. West Deer's not alone in that. And, we need to do better recruiting for our police, fire, and EMS organizations. So that's why I'm motivated to, be a township supervisor as well as, provide the direction for the development, help with the zoning ordinances and make sure that they match what, it says in our comprehensive plan and what the residents want. One of the things that, occurred when I first got on the board was our comprehensive plan, which is basically like a resident survey and report from a consultant, was overdue. And it's even further overdue now. We did approve to have that redone. It's supposed to be done every 10 years. I think our current one is 14 years old. And, that should be our guiding document as township supervisors on, what we do, with the zoning ordinances and what ordinances we approve. So we kind of did things a little bit out of order. They worked on the zoning ordinance updates for over 5 years and just approved them, last year or earlier this year. So, now we're doing the comprehensive plan. But in reality, the comprehensive plan should have came first.
Sure. When you look at, it's funny you mentioned it. I was looking at kind of our population numbers in West Deer and when we grew, and there was some population growth in the late 20th century, kind of regular, steady growth. And now it's, even just looking from 2000 to 2020, there is growth. There's less growth, but there's still all of these development plans coming in. Like, who is the population of West Deer, and is there anything about that should concern us, or that should affect how we plan our future development in West Deer?
Who is our population? Well, for the last several years, we've seen steady growth, housing plans, come into the township. But in the last 5 years, we've saw a dramatic increase. A lot of senior living communities, 55 and up HOAs. We saw Concordia High Point be built, which is 109 apartments for senior living. So, I think, the type of growth that we want versus the type of growth that we get, is all dependent on, how we set up our zoning ordinances. My goal is to have balanced development here in the township so that we're not overwhelming our public safety organizations, and we're not overburdening the school district, as well. So
From like a fire department background, for example, or EMS, how do all of these development plans affect public safety in general? What do we have to look out for? Or what are the concerns there?
well, we definitely saw a large call volume increase in both fire and EMS in the last 10 years. And I would say it's getting to the point where we are overwhelmed because, while we still have a need for volunteers, the calls just keep coming. In 2008, the fire department actually started doing medical first response to assist an overwhelmed EMS service. The goal of that was to reduce the response time, to medical emergencies. And I think we've done a good job at doing that. We are the only fire department in the township that does it. So wherever there's assistance needed, we respond.
So when did you first get it started in public service in general? I mean, it's been decades, right? Was I right about that? I
Yeah,
tried to do my homework.
I'm second generation. Yeah, my dad was a volunteer firefighter. My whole family was a volunteer firefighter. So I joined whenever I turned 14 and started in the junior firefighter program. My brother followed suit a few years later, and been here the whole time, never left.
We just went through in 2023 and 2024 a process of working on the fire tax, getting that approved, and moving forward. Why was that such a priority for our fire departments? There was a lot of talk about it.
So we were behind in the times. We had a fire tax implemented in 2006 at the will of the voter referendum to ensure that the fire departments had a steady source of income. At that time, prior to that, the volunteer fire departments were completely reliant on donations and their ability to fundraise. So this gave us a little bit of steady income year after year to plan for, new equipment and new vehicles and stuff like that. When the recent discussion occurred, there had been no increase in the fire tax since 2006. And the fire department, just like, people at home, were seeing, a huge increase in inflation. One example, the fire trucks, doubled in price, and, bingo just wasn't cutting it anymore.
What does
So,
a fire truck run these days?
well, just for an engine, you're looking at about 900,000. We were fortunate that we replaced our ladder truck in 2018 at the cost of 850,000. That truck today in 2025 would be about 1.4 million.
Wow. Yeah, bingo just kind of doesn't cut it, doesn't really cut it after a while. So
No, but it still does provide, 50% of our operating costs. We're not entirely funded by the fire tax. So
sure.
there is still a need to do fundraising. There's still a need, to take in donations and apply for grants where we can.
So grants are something that you're very familiar with.
Yeah.
And you saw, I think you mentioned a little bit ago that there might be some opportunities to kind of leverage uh, some of the available grants that are out there to our advantage. And you've been able to do that. Is that something that looking forward, that will continue to be able to do? Take that money
Yeah.
that's just out there for communities that need it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, we are actually losing out on huge opportunities to offset our taxes with grant funding. The fire department, West Deer number three has received over $3 million in the last 20 years to help us buy equipment, turnout gear, a new tanker, a new air compressor, rescue tools. That was a huge savings to the taxpayers by using the grant funding to pay for that. Just last year, came up at the township supervisors meeting that the police needed body cameras. The lease was up and they needed to be replaced. And, one of the things that I asked when I first got up there is what are the needs of the township and the departments of the township? And I didn't get a reply, but whenever this came up, I inquired as to, why they didn't seek grants. And they said that they did, but there were no grants available. So,
Mm.
we approved the purchase of, the body cameras with taxpayer funds. And then afterwards, I made a couple phone calls and found out that there was still grant funding available at the county specifically for body cameras. So when I reached out to county council, they said, yeah, we still have money. How much do you need? So we were able to get $40,000 towards the purchase of body cameras. Um,
I can't believe
last
that.
year, last year, West Deer number one, brought it to the attention of the township that, they were in need of replacing all of their breathing apparatus. The cylinders that hold the air are only good for 15 years. The township wasn't able to help them, but, I reached out to them and, we applied through a federal grant program and then they received $100,000. 95% of the total project was paid for by grant funds. So, as we continue to develop, in the township, public safety, needs to constantly look for those grant opportunities, as well as the township for our infrastructure needs as well.
What do you think when we look at infrastructure around the township? Like, what are our needs? How are our roads? How are stormwater management? How are we doing there? And what do we need to do going forward?
Well, stormwater management needs to be maintained year after year to make sure that, flooding doesn't occur. We own a senior center out on 910 that really hasn't been updated in, the last couple decades,
Sure.
aside for some facade changes and window replacement. But, the township building was just replaced, but we have now ownership of the EMS building, which is in need of upgrades. Just this year, they had a leaking roof, which, they were aware of. Once the roof was repaired, then they found mold in the ceiling So,
Mm.
the ceiling had to be replaced, the ceiling tiles, um, but there's other improvements that need to be made. The
And these aren't
retaining,
optional things. You
no, the
can't.
retaining wall in the back of the building on the EMS building is falling in. The steps are collapsing. Some of it, threatens the structure. Some of it is a safety issue. Roads will always be, critical infrastructure that we need to address. Um, and there's still some roads out there, in the township that haven't been paved in 20 years. So, but roads, bridges, we currently have a bridge right now that's down to one lane because of a tree that fell on it and, you know, collapsed it. So those are the types of things that we should be inventorying and making sure that we're routinely checking on them to make sure that they're properly maintained so that they last longer.
Yeah. And, when we're looking at things like bridges, I mean, that we have, these are obviously things that just have to be addressed. And finding ways to accomplish those without using tax money is just an amazing thing to be able to do.
Well, Steve, when you know what the need is and you create a strategic plan and a list, you can go after those projects through grant applications. If we look at our neighboring municipalities, they're getting grants year after year, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to improve intersections, install traffic lights, improve their parks. That's what I want to do here in West Deer Township. I think that we're missing out on a lot of opportunity.
Mm. You mentioned a little bit ago about there's a lot of development going in there, and we talked a little bit about how that affects EMS, but just the development plans themselves uh, are controversial in and of themselves, right? You have this charm of West Deer Township that we've all grown up in and that we all love, but we want to encourage people to come here and we want them to have nice places to live, but we don't want to sacrifice some of that just suburban, beauty that we get to see. As a supervisor, now that you've done this for a bit, how do you balance that? How could you possibly balance all of that successfully?
Well, it's tough, but it takes, collaboration. We have a planning commission that provides recommendations to the township supervisors, and the township supervisors they have goals that, we can implement through zoning ordinances. But the problem, in the last 5 years is they just keep approving with no consideration on how that affects the traffic on the roads or the fire, EMS, and police organizations, the public works who have to, you know, plow and treat those roads in the wintertime, and we have to eventually repave those roads through the township budget. So, it's a very careful balancing act, but it's a discussion that is constantly ongoing,
Mm,
and that's I feel doesn't happen as much as it should. One of the
sure.
biggest things that I see is lacking, especially from my experience 10 years ago. I've been going to the township meetings for over 20 years, and there was a lot more coordination and communication with key stakeholders in the community. When there was a housing plan or a commercial building, being proposed, the planning commission would, share that information with the fire departments and, give us an opportunity to make recommendations or suggestions. That's very important because, if they install a fire hydrant in the wrong location, it would be potentially detrimental if there was an emergency. Making sure that the roadways are big enough and the cul-de-sacs are big enough for us to be able to turn around emergency vehicles. Those are all considerations.
And it seems like some of these plans, because I've even just a few of the planning meetings lately, I'm looking at the developers that are trying to find ways to get around some of these things that we've put in place, like just in lot sizes and sidewalks and how wide the roads need to be. It looks like they're trying to find ways to get around things that you're telling us are important that we shouldn't be kind of sweeping aside.
Sure. I mean, the zoning ordinance provides a general guideline. If there's something that they, can't meet, then they would ask for, a variance on a particular section within the zoning ordinance. And then it would be up to the planning commission, to agree or not agree, and the recommendation to the supervisors. So there's always back and forth. Um, but that stuff needs to be hashed out during the planning phase.
And it's important. I think I'm what I'm hearing you say too is that it's important to listen as a supervisor to what the planning, what their recommendations are. Sometimes that happens, and sometimes that doesn't happen. That's why I'm asking.
Absolutely. I mean, so the folks that we have on our planning commission, a lot of them have been doing it for a long time, and have seen the housing plans, come in, and they, learn through research, what's good, what's bad, what they may want to see in the next housing development.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're the ones that, work with the developers the most, and, carry on those conversation about, what's necessary, and, through recommendations, even from the fire department,
Yeah.
that all that can be discussed before there's ever one shovel put in the ground.
Yeah. And a lot of that community involvement in the planning process, it's come up with several candidates that I've talked to, and they kind of have me convinced that that's really valuable with different workshops that they'll put together before they that they take into consideration when they make their recommendation or not.
Sure. I mean, I always thought it was a good opportunity as the fire chief, to be at the planning commission meetings and,
Yeah.
see the presentation. And that way, we can make recommendations on hydrant locations and stuff like that. But Steve, what I talked about, like the communication breakdown, we weren't getting those plans for whatever reason. So we were kind of behind the eight ball and trying to make changes that we needed, while the plan was being built. In one scenario, we had 3 apartments constructed on Bakerstown Road, and all 3 of them have the wrong fire department hose connections on it. That's stuff that we could have worked out in the planning phase, and made sure everybody was, following the ordinance. So,
And like when we get started in January of 2026, we're going to have maybe some new faces. And what do you think should be the one of the top priorities, maybe one or two, however you want to answer it, of the board of commission, or excuse me, the board of supervisors in January or February of this year? What should we be focusing our energy on once we put this, kind of a mix of new and old people, not
sure.
old people, but faces together?
Given the amount of development that we're seeing, I think we need to take a hard, fast look at the zoning ordinances and, make appropriate changes. With the comprehensive plan approved, I'm not sure when it's going to be completed, but we can incorporate that into the changes that we make. One of the changes that I, supported whenever we were discussing the zoning ordinance was removing the gas wells from conditional use in R2 and R3. Those are our most densely populated residential areas. And I thought, that was kind of a no-brainer. I received nearly 100 emails from residents saying, please make this change. And, I proposed it, I fought for it, but the other supervisors, didn't want to make the change. So, that's one thing that, I think needs to be changed relatively quick. The other thing that I think we need to get back to is, the supervisors having committees to work on different areas of local government. I'm not sure why, but for whatever reason, they did away with committees. So, we have to, as supervisors, wait for the information and the recommendations to come from the township manager before we can even start any type of debate or deliberation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of bumping up against the clock. I'm going to give you the last word here. Let us know why it's important for us to consider keeping you along in District 4, and I'll let you kind of take it home with that.
I appreciate it, Steve. So, I really love the community of West Deer. I lived here all my life. I plan on staying here a long time. And, I think that we're kind of falling behind in a lot of areas that we need to collaborate and, come up with solutions for problems and issues that the township is going to be facing, in the near future. But some of my goals for the township is to create, an efficient local government that is ethical and transparent and accountable to the residents. I think we've gotten away from that. It frustrates me when people ask during public comment at meetings, they ask questions, but they don't get answers. So I think that's something that we have a duty as elected officials to ensure happens, that the public gets the public information that they desire. I also would like to work on a strategic improvement plan, for the entire township so we can forecast our needs and apply for the grants, before we're faced with an absolute need to replace something because a lease ran out or something like that. We talked about, creating safe zoning ordinance that, share the ideals of our residents. And, as a township supervisor, I'm always, very concerned about, our budgeting and, our taxes. As a rural community, one of my goals is to keep taxes low and to utilize grant funding, to help offset the cost of operational cost increases. Like I said, I do have experience in that field. We've been very successful in helping numerous communities in 3 states, get grant funding. So that's something that I'm very familiar with. But I'm also looking to work more closely with our state and county representatives to get as much as we can for West Deer Township. So I hope I've earned your vote, and I hope you guys come out on November 4th.
Thank you, Josh Wiegand, everybody. District 4, Democratic ticket. We appreciate you spending some time with us. And I just want to close by saying thank you to everybody that joined us this election season. This is going to be our last candidate that has signed up to speak to us in this online forum. And I appreciate you guys as well for agreeing to take the plunge and do this. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody and thank you very much. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Steve.